Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today I have the pleasure of Suzie Lewis on the show. Hello to you, Suzie.
Hi, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Julian.
Good to see you. You are the Managing Director at Transform for Value, which is all about bringing out the best in people to bring out the best in your business. You're also a podcast host of Let's Talk Transformation, which I had the pleasure of being on a month or so ago. So I enjoyed my conversation with you. And today we're going to be exploring inclusion, collaborations, human systems, and powerful coalitions as well. But before we get into that, Suzie, I'd like to ask you, what do you love about what you do?
People, I think, in a nutshell. So I think people and the fact that you never see what you never see exactly what you get, which is the complexity of people. And I think that's why I called my business Transform for Value, is because value, we often talk about KPIs, finance, return on investment, figures. And for me, there is a lot of untapped potential in organizations and also a lot of value to be had through the human element and human systems in organizations, communities, society in general. So what I love the most is having curious conversations with people and watching potential unlock itself. That's what I like the most.
Fantastic. And I'm curious to explore that whole piece on, people in terms of why they are, where they are, and the fact that they don't always perhaps show their true potential. What do you think holds people back in that sort of context in an organization? Why are people not being their true self in that sense?
I think fear. So either fear of looking silly, fear of not fitting in, fear of not being up to the mark, and also just not being seen or heard because of various systems and processes in organizations which are also geared towards extroverts. So if you're quieter or you express yourself differently, often you're not heard. And I feel that a lot of potential lies untapped in organizations for reasons that if you make them explicit, as we're doing now, people would step into a space where they could thrive more.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I was in many organizations that were very geared towards being extroverts. And if you weren't showing that extrovert energy, you weren't passionate, and you weren't demonstrating the values of the organization because you were more quiet. I mean, I'm more of an ambivert anyway, but it's interesting how we need to be mindful of the different types of people. And I guess I know organizations do attract more of those types if they've got more extrovert, more introverts, I guess. But it's an interesting thing to think about, to try and unlock that and try and overcome that expectation of fear as well that does get in the way. We're talking about collaborations, and I've been having sort of conversations about collaborations. I do a lot of collaborations with other people, and I think it's really powerful. Why do you think collaboration is becoming even more important within organizations, and how organizations are going forward? Do you think it's becoming a more prominent thing within how they operate and how they work?
So I think it's becoming more prominent in terms of how they operate and how they work, but also in terms of the dialogues we're having around subjects. So collaboration has become one of the sort of buzzwords, and rightly so, because I think as technology connects us more and more, we're more interconnected, not only in organizations, but in the world. And if you look at what that means for the way we need to interact, the whole piece around ecosystems, business ecosystems, but also human ecosystems, because essentially it's about relationships. And what is changing is how the business is run by different relationships, and therefore what different skills you need, both at a business level but also at a human level, to interact to create the end-to-end value chain, of which relationships are the currency of those systems for me. So whether we're talking about teams, working with teams, so organizational design, whether we're talking about supply chains, so markets, suppliers, different actors, the value chain is now end-to-end, thank you, digital, because that's what digital enables from a data perspective. But it isn't just about data, it's also about the human element of that. So I think collaboration has become a more explicit lever, thanks to the interconnection of businesses, platforms, systems, and everything that isn't human. And now humans need to catch up with, okay, so what does that mean for the way I speak to you, Julian, for the way I interact with my team, for the way I interact with my suppliers, with my clients, etc. So that's why I think collaboration has become this big buzzword, and we need to understand what exactly it means.
Yeah, and I think people talk about it and say, "Oh, we're collaborating," and even in the language when people engage, or we're collaborating, but are they truly collaborating? What is collaboration? And I think it's great that technology is there, and we've got that more connectivity and pace and access to data and dashboards and everything else, which really helps, obviously, within organizations and externally with suppliers. But it's the people bit that's really important, isn't it? And how we bring those people together, because ultimately, we are social people. We do like interacting with individuals and teams and people of our same human beings. So looking at, leaders maybe listening to this now and got the buzzword of collaboration, and thinking, okay, I collaborate, I do stuff with this person or with that team. How does that go into reality of what does collaboration really mean? What does it mean to you? What have you experienced? What have you observed that is what I would call true collaboration in an organization?
So I think it starts with the quality of your conversations. And it's really about how you act and interact with the people you need to in organizations to get to the business outcome. And I'm saying it like that, Julian, because I do think we can have collaboration overload where it can lead to burnout without necessarily being effective collaboration. And that's the shadow side of we need to collaborate, must collaborate, ring him, ring her, ring them. Yes and no. Yes, we need to collaborate, but it's always about understanding where we're going to go together. So if I put like big words on it, it's the collective vision. Okay, so why do we need to collaborate and where are we going together? But how do I get there? So collaboration, particularly via tools, can be very transactional. And you can just get back into that sort of hustle culture of going from one team's meeting to another, and adding to the chat and doing this and doing that. Is that true collaboration? Not in my definition, because I don't know whether that's value adding, what I'm telling you. I don't know whether you need that information. And the quality of our conversation is not allowing me to put another jigsaw piece into the puzzle. So I think collaboration has to be intentional and it has to be value adding, whether that's in business or not, but let's stick with business for the moment. So I think, if I'm going to take some of your time as a peer or a boss or another team member, I want to be sure that that's going to be value adding for you and me, and it's going to add some value to our common outcome.
Yeah, and I think that is almost like asking those questions, isn't it, before you engage, before you go and collaborate and do that thing. Actually, what value will that person add to me, and what will I add to them in this collaboration? Because some of the parts piece, isn't it? That's what needs to happen here. And I think having that, which a lot of teams or organizations don't always have, that clarity of vision or shared goal, where we're going with this, and do we need to collaborate? Is that important to? And rather than just thinking we've got to collaborate, that's what we're told to do, aren't we?
Yeah, and I also think it's about going to get different perspectives. So often I co-facilitate things intentionally as well, because it's so interesting to see somebody do the same thing but really differently. Just as it's interesting to have different viewpoints and different ideas on the same subject. And collaboration for me is about that, which brings us to the inclusion piece around diverse perspectives, because you can have diverse perspectives around the table and not do anything with them. And I think collaboration is really about putting inclusion into action. So I will hear all the voices around the table, and then we will decide what to do. So it might not always be as democratic as that, and we might not choose your decision or my decision, but at least I've heard it and it's added a different perspective into the mix. That's why collaboration is so key, but also because humans need humans. And I think that sense of belonging to something bigger and getting excited about your idea or upset about your idea or curious about someone else's idea is really important in terms of motivation and creating that space where people can actually thrive, as opposed to just being that hamster wheel. Julian, I've got to get it done. Oh, they told me I have to speak to Suzie, I better speak to her then. That sort of, I've got to do this because that's what I'm meant to do, as opposed to, wow, I'm going to go and find out what they think or what he thinks and look at what that can bring to us. And I know it's incredibly easy to say because I'm not under the pressure of delivery as we're chatting. And that, when you pressure humans, they revert to type. So I think that's why it needs to be so intentional, and why it's so important, the quality of the conversations you're having and the distance that you take to think, what do I need from that other person? Why are we collaborating?
Because, as you say, the collaboration piece immediately creates that different perspectives. Whether you're just collaborating with another individual or a team, you're going to get that diversity of thinking and approach. And we know that, and again, another buzzword of diversity and inclusion, but actually, there's some real studies that are done that the more diverse you have, the more perspective you have in a team, you'll get higher performance, and high performance creates profit and all that sort of stuff, which obviously organizations like. But it makes really sense, doesn't it? Because if you've got a problem, or I'm not entirely sure, if I work with somebody else, they'll have a different perspective on it. It sounds really obvious, but sometimes we forget the obvious, don't we, in our speed that we think is going to be quicker, but actually working with somebody else might be slightly slower, but actually will ultimately be quicker in the end in terms of the result or the solution you might get to. What do you think holds organizations back from being that truly collaborative and almost creating that inclusion, diversity within teams?
So one word that springs to mind is ego. And I think organizations are made up of people, and we are in a paradigm today, particularly leadership paradigm, which we've been educated into, and which is continued through the processes and the policies and the culture of organizations today, and that is shifting, is the need to be right, and the all-knowing leader, and I'm going to put it in vertical columns, the strong leader. And we get these myths, that your boss knows more than you, or you can't speak to somebody and challenge them because they're 1 or 2 levels higher than you. And so I think there are lots of unwritten, implicit assumptions and codes to the ways of working in organizational culture, which means that people we're back to fear, Julian, they don't dare speak up, or they don't want to speak up because it might affect their career, or they just don't think that their idea is valuable. And I think that stops people collaborating. And when I look at the way organizations are siloed, the effect of that is it stops organizations collaborating, because, they all have their own budgets, they all have their own boxes, they all have their own business plans, ways of working. And, that end-to-end piece isn't there. So I think as long as organizations perpetuate that way of working and that way of rewarding and incentivizing performance, which is mainly individual today, although it is shifting. So until you have more skin in the game around collective objectives, I think humans won't be collaborating with the same need in mind.
Yeah, because it's that sort of fear, isn't it? That sense of, or it's almost that, we're talking psychological safety here, where people need to feel that they can connect, learn, challenge, make a mistake, put their hand up, contribute. All that, it's all that type of thing, isn't it? And if we've got an organization, and people might be listening right now who are thinking, they see the value that collaboration can really help their organization move forward. As a leader, where do they start with this? Rather than say, we just need to collaborate, because it's more than just that. There's, if we started to unpick this, where would you start with an organization in your experience?
So I think I go back to my sort of days of being a lean expert. I think it's the current state analysis, so where are we at? Because I think you have to meet organizations, and therefore people, where they are on this subject in terms of maturity and how comfortable they are with the ways of working. So where are we today? Where do we have pain points for collaboration, or where is lack of collaboration costing us, either from a human perspective or from a business perspective? And let's start there. Why are we not collaborating, or are we over collaborating, whatever, but why is it not working, and how could we improve that? And maybe it needs something radical. Maybe it's like a change of the whole organizational design, or maybe it's just a tweak in, we need to put more, you touched on psychological safety, we need to be more explicit about the permission in this space. Or we may need to, I'm a big believer in asking people what they feel. Now that's an uncomfortable conversation, but particularly around inclusion, one of the best ways of finding out if people feel included is to ask them. And so if I see that collaboration isn't working, My first question, having assessed the current state with my own assumptions and my own belief systems, so they're not right, they're just my lens, would be, okay, so I'm seeing that if we collaborated more here, this may be more efficient. What do you think? And why are we not collaborating? Do you feel we're collaborating? That's a very simple question, but it's quite a difficult answer sometimes.
So how do we get to that point where people will answer that question about, do they feel included, the inclusion piece? Because without them sort of feeling to say the right answer as opposed to how they truly feel, because it goes back to this fear piece, isn't it? And
yes,
retribution, and
yes,
and it's how we deal with that.
I mean, I would start by framing my observations to the person or the group. So here's what I'm observing about our collective ways of working. So it's not personal to any one person in the group. It's an observation on the collective. Here are my observations. First step, naming and formalizing my observations, which are mine and only mine. So what do other people observe? And I think that creates a space where people will say more than they normally would, because you've opened that conversation around collectively, this is what I'm observing. It's not, am I right or wrong? It's what's your observations?
Yeah.
So there isn't the judgment on right or wrong. And I would be very explicit about my intentions. I'm looking here to see if we all share the same observations or not, and that's fine. And if we don't, which we probably won't, because, people are very different and have very different lenses, then what can we take from that, curiously, and improve the way we feel about the way we work?
I like the fact that you do it without judgment and create that just what I observe, which neutralizes it. It's not a dig at anybody, because some people find it feeling being critical about something or be negative, perceived as being negative, because you're labeling it as a judgment, basically.
Yes.
Which then feels a bit like, oh, we're having a go here. But actually, if you don't put a judgment on it, then it's an observation. And I found in teams, when the leader takes the role and the lead almost models that, basically, is others will follow. Although there's a danger of group think coming here, because they'll say something and then everybody will just say exactly the same or similar, which is slightly unhelpful in that situation. I was at a meeting this morning. I'm a trustee of a charity, and we were having a review from an external we're part of a franchise, and we gave some, I would say, observations. It came across more, it wasn't criticisms, but real, I think, and it was really helpful, because they received it and they took it really well. And it wasn't like, oh, you're rubbish at this, rubbish at that. It was just, this is how we're observing, this is how we feel, that's how the impact it has on our organisation. Just observed it now, thinking about now, really collaborative, because they're writing things down and the conversation backwards and forwards, and it really helped in terms of for them, but also helped us in terms of them listen to us as well.
I think it's also about just giving the facts in a way. This is the situation, this is what I'm observing. And just, the big red flag for me, for anyone running that type of discussion to get diverse perspectives, is that if everyone starts saying, yeah, me too, yeah, we agree, then something's wrong. So it's not like, oh, that was quick, that was easy, they all agree with me. It's, I don't believe that we will ever have 100% unanimity in a group of individual human beings, because even if we share the same sort of thoughts about something, we'll still have a different lens, because we're all uniquely individual. So, my question then would be, okay, so everyone's saying yes, which would say to me that there's something wrong. If there's no dissension and there's no sort of difference of opinion, then either people don't dare to speak up, or they're not interested enough to speak up, or they're not speaking up for whatever reason. And I would put that observation back into the group.
That's interesting, actually. So observing the sort of lack of diversity in their sharing, that's really good. Yeah. I like that. That's a really good, and I think it's that just keeping it pure as an observation, and what other people observe. I like that. Coalitions. What's coalitions? Collaborations? Are they the same, or is something a bit more robust? Talk us through what you mean by a coalition.
Coalitions for me are really about getting people who would maybe never work together and going to intentionally get them to work together, to create either more momentum for change or a different diversity of perspective. So when I say collaboration, I expect to collaborate with the different, if I put myself back into an organization, with the different functions involved in the value chain. So procurement, finance, operations, business, HR. And I expect that to happen. But what about if I went to get some of the interns and some of the trustees and some of the shareholders and people who would maybe not collaborate on a daily basis with us? That's a powerful coalition. So it's really about allyship as well as collaboration. It's about creating momentum for change and spreading the lenses as far as possible, and really creating something that, if I zoom out, that fits over the whole system, that work together, even if they don't have to or they didn't used to. That's my definition of coalitions, is creating allies and ambassadors, if you like.
And these can be outside the organization as well as inside, can't they? It's not,
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm staying away from words like ambassadors, catalyst, champions, because often they're the words used in organizations, and therefore they get that meaning of it's people who do change, but it is normally people who do change, Julian. But I think it's really interesting, the coalition, the external part, because often organizations are very inward looking, and human being tendency is to be very inward looking, i.e. I only look through my window. So unless we intentionally do differently. So I think that's the coalition part, is creating different, more creative relationships.
And this is where you're getting people together and who you perhaps wouldn't normally get together. And that can be quite difficult in terms of whether it's not just thinking, but culture, time, energy, whole different things. If you're trying to create this sort of change momentum and almost bring these alliances, coalitions together, that's really quite tricky, isn't it, to do? And what are the difficulties in that, and how do you overcome those difficulties?
So I think there's a common goal which opens doors. I think the difficulties are around everything you've just mentioned. So cultural differences, do we see it in the same way, and also do we have the same time to give to it? If I put it back into organizations, the hierarchical discussion of, will my boss let me do that? Will it be well seen in the organization? Am I allowed to do that? And therefore, I think it often happens under the radar in organizations, or in a different part of organizational life where it's allowed, in inverted commas, so like employee resource groups or communities that are built up around a certain subject, so agile coaching or self-empowered organizations, or looking at talent management, or there's a subject that brings them together, and therefore the people that are in that have a link to the subject. I think what's interesting in coalitions is where it's somebody who has nothing to do with the subject in terms of job description or what they do in the organization, and that they want to go and add to that. So I think that's about personal agency, and the difficulty there, we're back to the beginning of our conversation, Julian, for me is fear. Can I go and speak to my boss about it? Can I do it during work time? What will my team think of me doing that? Fear, or the other end of fear, excitement and joy of, I'm going to go there with like-minded people and see what we can do with the status quo. So, and those people will find a way of doing that. But often the coalition part is done in lunchtimes, or at the end of the day, almost outside of work time. And I think probably reflecting on that, it's because it steps out of these boundaries that I've just discussed of, that's my job description. This is what I'm paid to, this is where I'm paid to spend my time. This is what I'm meant to be doing at work.
Yeah, because when you're interacting with, diversity of thinking and different groups that are not completely associated with you, you learn massively, don't you? And I know somebody within my networking, he does a lot of, he's on a lot of boards. He does a lot of stuff in the community, and I was thinking, how does he ever do time to do his job? But part of that, his job is to do that, and in some ways, and he then gets a network of people, then he gets insights into things, and he can bring all that into his organization. And so there's some real value of him getting out and about, so to speak, even in work time, if you know what I mean. I think it's going away from that, this is my job description, therefore I've got to do this, but actually this will almost make it more impactful because of other reasons that are not within my job description, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think it's also the redefinition of learning. So learning doesn't just happen in a training room, as we both know, but, going to external conferences, which is often a reward and a recognition, but it's also a massive learning opportunity for the person or the people who go, but also what they bring back into the organization. And I think HR don't see it like that today. And that's a paradigm shift that needs to happen, that HR need to think of the time they're spending in that community as an upskilling of their leadership skills, of their learning skills, of their mental and emotional agility, and not just HR, but leaders. But I'm saying HR because learning is still linked to HR in a lot of people's minds and in a lot of organizational realities, which, it is part of the HR responsibility, but it's also part of the leaders and people's responsibility to decide how they're going to continue learning.
We've mentioned fear quite a lot in this conversation, and fear seems to be the one that holds people back in terms of collaboration, speaking up, saying what they really think in a situation, or doing coalitions, doing things outside of the job description. How big of an issue do you think fear is in the organizations you've worked with?
I think it's still very prevalent. And therefore, I think it's still quite a large issue. I think it's an issue that's sort of hinted at or sometimes explicitly underlined, but nothing is really done about it. And we're back to courageous conversations and why. And not just the leaders don't want to have courageous conversations, but individuals don't want to have those conversations either. So, I think the starting point to that is the role modeling of people who aren't scared for whatever reason. And, looking for those people, looking for the groups of people who are doing stuff that's different or speaking up. I was going to say with surprising ease. You never know how people are feeling inside, but if they're able to do it, then you can go and have conversations with them as to how they do that. And you might get surprises as to how comfortable they feel or not. But I think we do talk a lot about fear in organizations, and I think it's real. I'm also seeing a shift, though, Julian, in terms of because organizations have to work differently, and the sort of hierarchical pyramidal structure is now gaining less momentum. More questions are being asked, and even this conversation, what about fear in organizations? It was never spoken about before, which was where its power came from, of course. And I think now we are speaking about it, and people are starting to think about, am I scared? What am I scared of? And is that okay for me? So I think there is a lot of fear. There's also a lot of excitement and curiosity. We just don't talk about it as much. And I do think that. I think everyone's, this fear in organization. Yeah, it does exist. But I think there's a lot of people who are excited about doing things differently and who manage to push the system. And we don't talk about them yet. So I don't think it's like only fear. And I really want to make that point because that's all we hear about, but because that is what's causing burnout and unhappiness and stress, and we need to talk about it. But, there are opportunities there for the people who are in the excited, curious box to come and help the people. And maybe it's not up to the people who are a little bit scared to go to them. Maybe it's up to people who are doing different things to have a look and think, okay, where can I go and help somebody else do things differently?
Yeah, I like that. And I think, the fact that more and more people are working on their own sort of personal self-development rather than just waiting for HR, whoever needs to turn me on a course or whatever it is. Actually, they're reading books, they're listening to podcasts, they're just work on themselves. People getting their own coaches, a whole host of stuff. So I think there's a lot more that curiosity. And I was talking to a client this week that was supercharged about bringing some of the stuff he's been learning as an individual into an organization and how he wants to change that. And I think there's a lot more excitement about that as well. And I appreciate there is the fear there in organizations that needs to be worked on, but there is a lot of curiosity and thinking, what about this, what about that? And organizations where that fear sort of goes and you've got those curious individuals, you have such a powerhouse of wonderful things that can really go places. What are your sort of final thoughts really on collaboration and sort of coalitions in organizations?
I'm a massive believer in the momentum of getting like-minded people together in communities, whether you call them communities of practice or powerful coalitions or teams, but I think never let anyone tell you it's not possible, because it is. But maybe you're in the wrong place, and maybe you're thinking something that is hindering you from making things possible. So I would say always scan your organization for where things are going on that you haven't heard about, or that you can see happening that aren't on a radar somewhere, because that's where innovation happens, isn't it? At the edges of systems. And often people who are doing that type of thing are not asking permission, so it's not in the mainstream. So I think my first invitation would be, how do you feel in your workplace? Do you feel that you're collaborating with the right people? Are you motivated by that? Are you not? Could you collaborate more with different people better? I think some fear is also, as long as it's like, I don't think if you're not scared of something, it's not big enough. That's my motto. So I think stepping over oneself is a natural part of growth and learning. So I think understanding where you stand and what you need for motivation, what's going to fill your energy cup, and it might not be the meeting you're going to next, and that's fine. Okay, so it's that balancing of where do I go to fill my energy cup, and making sure it doesn't get empty, because everybody has parts of their job they don't like. And I think everybody has some level of fear when they step into new things or different things, but I think it's about understanding where your fear is coming from.
No, that's really helpful. Really helpful discussion there, Suzie. I really appreciate your time. If people want to connect with you and get in touch with you, how best do they do that?
I think LinkedIn is the best place. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, or via my website, transformativevalue.com. Either of those, they'll get an answer pretty quickly from me.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for your time today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.